You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
I think I would give my younger self the advice of to be patient with myself. I was always somebody who wanted to be, older and better. And, when I was a young professional, I wanted to be doing when I was a young junior, I wanted to be doing the equitation, like the big kids were doing. And when I was doing the equitation, I wanted to be a professional. And
Yeah.
Even as a professional, I was always, trying to, you got to put in your dues and you got to, take your time. And I was always very eager to learn, but I was always in a bit of a rush to get further ahead than where I was. And when I now look back and think, don't worry, you're going to, if you keep going, you'll figure it out. It's almost impossible not to figure it out with the longevity in this kind of business. And not just me, that's anybody who wants to, keep at it and keep working and keep learning. And so, yeah, I would say just be a little more, take the time and enjoy what's happening at the time.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Julia Murphy, and this week's episode is with Grand Prix jumper and top hunter competitor Kristy Hererra. Kristy began her professional career after winning the USEF Talent Search Finals in 2002 under the tutelage of Frank and Stasia Madden of Beacon Hill Show Stables. For the first few years in her professional career, Kristy rode for and learned from some of the nation's best, including BZ Madden, Nona Garson, and Aaron Vale. In 2006, Kristy became assistant trainer to Missy Clark at North Run, where she helped train numerous students to national championships in the equitation ring. While she worked at North Run, Kristy had the opportunity to spend a year riding and showing in Europe with Stefex Stables, where she competed in national and international FEI classes. During her time abroad, Kristy won 5 national Grand Prix classes and competed up to 20 horses per month. Since returning to the United States, Kristy has focused on training young horses and competing in both the jumper and hunter rings. In 2010, Kristy established her own business, Oasis Show Stables, which is located seasonally in Wellington, Florida, and Saratoga Springs, New York. In 2016, Kristy won the prestigious USHJA International Hunter Derby Championships aboard Miss Lucy, and in 2017, she won the $50,000 USHJA International Hunter Derby at Deer Ridge aboard Cannon. More recently, Kristy piloted Valhalla to the win in the $10,000 USHJA National Hunter Derby at the 2022 Winter Equestrian Festival. As she continues to compete at the highest levels in the hunter and jumper rings, Kristy and her husband Rich run their business and train juniors and amateurs. Before we dive into the podcast with Kristy, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, Practical Horseman On Demand, and share their message. At Practical Horseman On Demand, you can enjoy hundreds of how-to videos and get insider access to exclusive interviews and lectures, slow-motion demonstrations, and step-by-step tutorials taught by top-level pros in the hunter, jumper, equitation, and eventing disciplines. New content is always rolling out, so there's always fresh new videos available on topics important to you. Join now at practicalhorsemanondemand.com and start streaming from any smart device. Now enjoy the episode with Kristy. Thanks again for hopping on with me just to chat. It's great to meet you. And just to dive in, I would love to know, just as a trainer and a rider, what is your philosophy like?
My philosophy really as a trainer and a rider is about process. I've been lucky enough to deal with a lot of different horses and riders in my career. And, most of what I get out of every day when we go to the barn and I get on each horse and I approach each lesson is, what step is each horse in their process to whatever goal we're working towards. And that really helps me if I can remember that in the moment. And it's hard to sometimes when we're at the ring and we're competing and there's a lot of, pressure items going on, but each horse is really in a different, trajectory than their others. And we really try to focus on the progression of what was an improvement upon the day before, and where are we looking towards going forward. And that might mean, for one horse who's just starting to move up a level and jump, like, for example, I had a hunter this week that jumped 3.6 for the first time. And I was so just proud of him because he made, a little different error in each class, but they were such, in my, opinion, good mistakes. He was measuring the distances a little bit better, and he was measuring the height, and he had a rail in one class, but then he came back to the next class and really, used his hind end a lot better. So if I can keep working towards what process, how the process is working for each horse, then that sort of makes me a better rider and trainer as I go along, I think.
And I'm curious, I actually have a young horse who I'm going to start doing in some of the bigger hunter stuff. He's at about the 3 foot right now. So just for myself and those of us who have horses that are kind of moving up, what are some of the things that you do at home or at shows that helps move your horses along?
So I try to mix it up a lot for them. It's easy to get to where, you're trying to move up in a division and you just say, okay, so I've been jumping 2.6 and now I want to jump 3 foot or 3 feet. And I just, put the jumps up to 3 feet and practice that as much as possible. And horses really learn, and riders too, through repetition. So I try to start each day or each training session with something that they're familiar with and that they're comfortable with, which would be, let's say 2.6, and then just put in, a few different jumps in the course at a little bigger height, maybe in a stepping stone like 2.9. And so they are jumping something that's very comfortable for them, and then, a couple inches higher, and make it very incremental. I think that when you throw too much at a horse at one time, expecting it to go well is, probably not going to happen with that result. You like to, like you're teaching students too, give them something they can attain, make it a little bit harder for them to work towards, and then go back to something that's a little easier. And, sort of each time you do any sort of training like that, then change it up and change up the height of the jump that you're trying to add into. And every time that you make a step forward, just make sure that there are some comfort zones, but then you keep pushing where, in little spots where they can do it easily. Making them set up their jobs so they're set up for success is really the way to train anything. Right. So that's what I would suggest. Instead of just jumping full force in, just add it in gradually as you go along.
And you mentioned teaching students a second ago. So I'm curious, we talked about your training philosophy. What would you say your teaching style is with your students?
I have learned that my teaching style needs to be patience. And it's really mostly about building confidence. No rider does well, including myself, when they're not confident in their own abilities. And while you're always trying to push them to be a little bit better or a little bit stronger, it's all about what they believe they can do. And that's such a huge part of competing, or like we just talked about, moving up a level, whether it's on a horse or, into a new class. And, the person that really taught me about teaching was my own sister. I was lucky enough to be her trainer when she was young for 6 years. I did that. I was a professional when I was 18, and she was 6 years younger. And while I was sort of figuring out how to find my footing as a trainer, I had her as a guinea pig. And, I'm a very traditional student myself. If somebody gives me some instruction, I, take that to the nth degree, and I want to perfect it, and I want to do it, over and over until it's just right. And my sister learns totally differently. She will take instruction and then try it out and then say to me, it really feels better if I do it this way. And which maybe wasn't the way I had explained it, but in her riding style, that's what felt better. And, if she accomplished the same goal, that gave her confidence. So I really had to learn how to watch and learn from the student and then adjust my teaching as I went, which that took a while for me to learn, that kind of patience, especially with my sister. But it also taught me that students really learn at their own pace and their own methodology. And if I can let them teach me how they learn, then I can become, the better trainer in that way.
It's so interesting you say that, because I interviewed Daniel Blumen for this podcast a few weeks ago, and he said something very similar, that, his riding style might not be the same as his students, and you kind of have to adapt to, their bodies. Every person's conformation is different, and that may, affect their riding style, and you kind of have to learn how to help the student excel in the style that fits them the best.
Yeah, exactly. And there are so many different, different disciplines that we do in this sport, and how much one person is really, you find out what their strengths are and work on that to keep building their confidence. And then, take their weaknesses and see how much you can improve upon them, but don't let everything that they need to work on become the focus of each lesson. Put what they are good at first, and then add in how that can help, something they need to get a little better at.
And when you are teaching students, do you ever see kind of a trend in things that your students really need to work on?
The biggest thing I think students or riders need to work on in general is pace. Yes. I think that I was taught that at a very early age, that, you find a distance better when you're going forward, and making mistakes going forward are almost always easier to fix than making mistakes slowing down and going backwards. And each rider, I like to think that most riders, or I do think that most riders ride in a similar fashion as what their personality is. So, if you have sort of a bit of an outspoken, energetic person, they might ride, with a little, extra energy and a little extra, almost too aggressive in some ways. And then if you have a student that's a little quieter and a little shyer, they're not always willing to get out of their comfort zone and kind of ask the horse to really gallop forward. But both of those students would need to work on how to adjust their pace. If the overly ambitious student likes to get too fast, then they have to learn how to contain that energy in their horse. And if the passive student isn't quite sure of how to get the most out of their horse, then they really need to work on how to go forward and push their horse into what is more of a gallop.
I can totally relate to that. After how many years I've been riding, pace is something that I have to constantly remind myself of, and my trainer has to remind myself of. So I totally agree with that point there. So when you are teaching, do you have, or actually teaching or training yourself, or training a horse, do you have an exercise that is a favorite of yours, and why do you think it's important to work on?
Just going back to pace, I work a lot on some pole or cavaletti work where, we'll put two poles opposite each other and work on what kind of pace, or even almost a mile per hour range they should be in on the way to the approach to the jump or the pole, and then how to slow down on the landing. And then when you get to the top of the turn, go back to that same pace. And, if you can do that over something small and just get comfortable with how the tempo can dictate your distance, then that could become a little easier once you get into the jumping. Or jumping bigger jumps, I should say. Another exercise I like doing is making students decide before they even get to looking for a distance, what type of distance they're going to choose, choosing it before it chooses you. And usually I start with, again, pace and going forward and trying to find something that's moving up until they get comfortable with understanding that kind of timing and distance. And then saying, okay, now you're going to do the exact same pole or cavaletti, but you're going to do the waiting distance, and you're going to collect your horse as you go to it. And usually when you give the type of distance that you want the student to do, they have a better time figuring that out versus deciding, should I go forward or should I slow down, or, kind of questioning it until it gets to them. And that's the same with the horses too. The horses have to know both going forward and collecting. And so I will do a lot of, for example, I have a hunter that is lovely and quiet, but sometimes a little too cold to my leg as I turn the corner. So I'll just make him, forget the distance, but make him gallop up away from the turn. And I know that distance is going to come up going forward. I have a jumper that's a little bit excitable and aggressive and wants to get ahead of me. So I know that I practice waiting around the corner to that cavaletti or pole every time we try to practice. So I think putting whichever type of pace is a little less comfortable for the horse or the rider is the one they should,
Right.
Practice more and be definite as to what they're asking for before they even have to look for the timing of the distance.
And getting into your background a little bit, can you tell me how you got interested in horses and riding to begin with?
Yeah, my parents had a barn in our backyard, and we just started learning. I'm one of four, learning as kids how to ride. My mom was a rider as a junior, and what started as a little, 2-stall barn with 2 ponies turned into a 10-stall barn with a little lesson program. And, I was lucky enough to basically live at the barn, and after school every day was, my friends were in the barn taking lessons from my mom. We would go to small horse shows on the weekend. And so I really started that as a young age. I think I was, 4 or 5 when I learned to actually ride a pony. And once I started, getting a little better at it, I realized that I liked riding different horses a lot. And I got to, because we had our own barn, my mom would, if a kid couldn't come that day, she would put me on the horse and, make me flattered or school it. And I really liked how much each horse was different, and I could figure out how to make each horse go better. And that's really carried me through my whole career. I got to ride with some barns. I rode with SBS Farms in Buffalo, New York when I was quite little or quite young, and started going to bigger horse shows with them. And they gave me lots of different horses to ride. And it's just was really interesting to learn how to make each horse become their best. And that's what I do today is, my favorite job is as a catch rider, and I get to ride lots of different types of horses and figure out, what can I do as a rider to really bring out the best in each horse, whether it's being softer or being stronger, or, some horses like more contact or some horses like more leg. And I just really love how my riding can help each horse, bring out the best in them.
And you probably touched on this a little bit with your answer to that last question, but what is it about horses in the sport that's kept you involved for so long?
It's just really fun still for me. I think that when I get on a horse, that especially one that I've worked with for a while, and I'm trying to, again, work on their process and either teach the horse to, do something that's a little bit more technical, or work with a horse that maybe is a little more seasoned, but I have learned a lot about how to make that horse go better. It's just fun at the end of the day. Showing is great and the business is part of it, but literally getting on the horse itself and riding each day is really what I have a good time doing. And so I think if I didn't have fun at it, I wouldn't be doing it anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And growing up riding, who would you say are some of your mentors and people who have influenced your riding over the years?
My mother to start, for sure. I would not be here one bit if it wasn't for her, who, she was the one who we would come home from a horse show and go and practice over and over, the things that I needed to, and that I, could make just 5% better for the next time I went out. And she really did my homework with me for so long that it made me better as a rider, for sure. I certainly have ridden with lots of different great riders and trainers. Jen Alfano is probably my longest mentor in my life. I think I had my first lesson with her when I was 9, and I still currently have one of her horses in my barn that I'm riding that she helps me on occasionally. And I've worked for her for different periods of my life. And she was the first person that had the job that I thought was really cool. And she was a rider who catch rode, and she just made every horse look amazing and like $1,000,000. And it really inspired me to work at it and figure out, how I could do that too. And certainly I've learned from so many other, great trainers. She was working with Susie Shelkoff at the time. I've worked with Missy Clark and John Brennan. I rode with Frank and Stacia Madden at Beacon Hill when I was a junior. They sort of put the finishing touches on my junior career. And again, my sister, I mean, she's not a mentor because she's, younger than me, but she certainly taught me so much about, what to take from this sport and how to appreciate it.
And I want to get into showing a little bit here. Can you talk a bit about some of your most important or favorable successes in your career?
Yes. I mean, I've gotten to ride so many nice horses that, we're nothing as riders without those horses. So I've won some things as a junior. I won the USET finals. That was actually on a horse that we bought that Jen Alfano found for my parents. We bought her as a 3-year-old. And, I think it was 5 years later, we won the USET finals together. And she was just a very, very challenging horse in all means. She was a chestnut mare. She had her own opinions. But it was just one of those things where we bonded from such a young age together. I was 13 when I got her and she was 3, and we were doing the metal McClays as a 4-year-old, probably way in over our heads. But she was the horse I won the USET finals on. I was on the gold medal team at Young Riders also in 2002. That was my last junior year. I showed in Belgium for a year. I lived there in 2008. And I won 5 Grand Prix when I was over there. And I would think today I'm probably a bit more known as a hunter rider, but I did those jumpers for quite a while and got to ride some fantastic horses that we don't really have access to over here as much with the sales barns. So that was a great, successful year over there. And then in 2016, I won Derby finals on a horse called Miss Lucy. She was maybe the most difficult horse I've ever had to ride, mostly because she was just such an incredible athlete and had such a specific style of riding that she required. She was a horse of Jen's. Actually, I was helping Jen that year. She was hurt. And, as far as the success that came with that championship, that day was for sure one of the coolest days of my career. And it put me on the map and kind of opened so many doors to the kind of horses I got to ride next. But, the thing I think that makes that day so special to me is I really accomplished something that I didn't think I could do. And my expectations were not at all to win that class going into it. I had ridden that horse in one horse show prior to that class. I was terrible on her in the previous class. It was a very hard course. It was certainly the biggest Derby finals to date, I think, was that night. And I just really walked in that ring the night and said, I really just want to ride my best. I thought nothing about the results. And when it was over, when the round was over, everybody's cheering and everybody's excited. And I literally did a fist pump as I left the ring, which, in the hunter ring, you don't do that really, but I did. I was so excited that we nailed it and we were on it. And it just that horse and I came together that night so specifically. And, there's a lag time at Derby finals when they, you have your round and then there's 3 panels of judges. And so walking up that ramp was probably a good 2 minutes before they announced the scores. And I went back, I think, second or third from the top. And I had no idea if I was going to be leading or if I was going to be out of the ribbons. And I didn't even care. I just cared that that was just a huge like accomplishment that I was able to get to. So it happened to work out that, I won that night, which was amazing. But the winning part was secondary to how good of a feeling it was coming out of the ring.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such a great feeling. Like you said, you fist pumped. Just, when you and your horse, you both put tried your best out there. And regardless of the ribbon, when that happens, it's just the best feeling in the world.
Yeah. And I think that that's really important for, as an industry, we need to hold on to, because we get so hung up on the day-to-day ribbons here, and it's exhausting. And we certainly, it's a competition, and nobody ever had a bad time winning, but it's really has to be about perspective in how again, going back to process, your process as a rider and your horse's process, in their training is going. You can really only compare yourself to the last time you showed. And we live in sort of a little bit of a bubble that is created by, we're in certainly the jumpers, you have the specifics, it's pretty clear as to how you won and how you lost. You either, were precise enough to leave the jumps up, or when you were fast enough, or you weren't. But in the hunters, we rely on one judge's opinion, and that person is sitting in a place at the ring that no one else is sitting. They have a very different view from all of us at the in-gate. Or certainly a very different view than the rider as they're riding around. And, the level or I would say the emotion that can go into that kind of how the results are played out is really challenging now for me as a professional to be a part of. I am at the point in my riding where the longer I do this, the less I care about someone else's opinion. I just care that I put my best self out there and I did the best job I could on the horse. And sometimes I don't do the best job, and I need to take whatever I did in that round and figure out how to make the next round better. So, I wish the hunters had a little more appreciation for how we are on our own theme and our own process than how the ribbons end up, laying out. But something certainly I kind of strive to teach my students as we go.
Yeah, definitely. And when you are at a huge show or a big class like that, like the Derby finals, do you ever get nervous? And if you do, how do you handle your nerves?
Oh yeah, I get nervous all the time. But I get nervous because I really want to do a good job. And I try to handle that by focusing on really what's happening in the moment and trying to not let myself think about it in too big of a perspective. It really comes down to literally each stride and cantering to the jump and feeling, what your horse is doing underneath you. I mean, they get nervous too, and they feel if your nerves are, making them a little bit more excited or, more agitated. So I try to just focus on actually riding. And I know that sounds really simple, but it helps me to think of, asking myself questions like I would a student. Do I have the right pace? Am I turning in the right way? Is my track okay? Am I looking up? Like the little basics that we sort of learn and are natural at some point. But they keep me in the moment when I'm going. And usually if I'm nervous, it's really just leading up to the class in anticipation. And once I get in the ring and I pick up the canter, then that tends to go away.
Yeah. And do you have any type of a routine before a big class? Or like a superstition or anything like that?
I'm not superstitious at all. And I know many people are. And I just, if I put too much effort into, what socks I wear or, what coat goes with this, then I end up focusing on the wrong thing. So,
right.
My general routine is my horse prepared. And that's why I really like getting up in the morning. We have such long hours in this kind of discipline, but if I can give myself the time to make sure I'm not rushed and to make sure my horse is prepared and worked properly and it feels good, the two of us in that morning ride, then that's sort of the best kind of routine I can set up for.
And I want to go into a little bit about winning and losing here. So, of course, in this sport, it's so unpredictable. Horses are unpredictable, and sometimes we don't win as much as we'd like to win. So how is that? How do you deal with maybe not winning a class you wanted to win, or not doing as well, or being in a rut or something like that?
That, kind of goes back to that, the point I was trying to make about how winning is a focus. When, I ride better when I take the focus off of winning. And I think that, everybody wants to do their best and everybody does want to win. This is a competition. We are here to, half the reason I'm still doing this at this level is because I like winning. But I think to make sure expectations are truly about where you are as a rider and what your horse is capable of. For example, I did a jumper class the other day, and the first day I went in and my horse is very competitive at meter 30. So I'm going in and my first, it's our first day back in Wellington, and we're all kind of eager to get there and show. And I'm definitely thinking about, how, if I could finish in the top 3, or if I could, be the fastest clear, how would that feel? Or how, are I expecting that because I've done that with this horse over the last year? Mm-hmm. And I go in the ring and I'm riding a little too aggressively and a little too fast, and my horse gets undone in the bridle and I have a rail down near the end of the course. And it was just a reminder to stop having those kind of expectations. And I made a couple of changes for the next day, and I ended up almost winning second, actually, but I had such a better round because I took the focus off of what that winning expectation might be and put the focus on how to expect the best from my horse. That's really, really hard to do when we have, all these classes we're supposed to be competing in, and we're always comparing ourselves to, our last win. But the reality is, this is a sport where you lose way more than you win. And you better get used to that if you're trying to be competitive in any way. And so I never really think of losing as a rut. I think of, if you're not winning or you're not as successful as you want to be in terms of your own riding, what is there to do better? We can always be better. We can always work on something a little more specific. You can't think of everything when you're in the ring. It's impossible. There's a 50 million things to do. So, what's that thing that it didn't do so well, and how can you go home and practice that better? And then when you go in the ring the next time, can you focus on just that part? And is that better? And then that might mean that something else goes out the window, and then you got to figure out how to balance that and fix that.
Yeah.
So learning from losses, that's the only way to be any kind of success. It seems like, the winning riders just win all the time. And that's just totally not true. For every class I win, I probably have lost, 10 or 12 that week if I'm in those classes. Yeah.
It's a nice reminder, especially to hear from someone of your caliber that happens, because you're right. A lot of people look at, these big riders, including yourself, and a lot of people, they see the wins and they don't really understand that in the background, or, the stuff that they don't see, everyone deals with that kind of stuff. And you just have to hang on to the positives. And, even if it was a bad round, you need to go forward and learn from it and fix your mistakes and just keep plugging ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes down to also being, confident that a loss is not a tragedy. A loss is a lesson. And sometimes it's easy to get caught up in, I made this mistake, twofold. Either you make a mistake, and if you've made it several times, you got to change something about that mistake. You got to change, how you approach it, how you think about it. If your riders, if as a rider, you're just continuously going too fast to a certain, out of the left turn on your horse, then, go back and do your homework and see what you can do to fix that and practice it. We don't spend sometimes enough time with the actual practice, and we're so busy showing that we, breaking things down and really analyzing how to execute something better will lead to more wins. And when you just sort of keep blazing ahead without thinking about how to be better, how to make something specifically better, then you're probably not going to keep winning.
And a couple more questions here just to wrap up. So why do you think you have been so successful in your career?
That's, again, I think it's just because I have fun with it. I really enjoy the horses, and I don't enjoy every single horse I ride. Some horses are way harder than others. But I enjoy what, little, even sometimes you get like just a tiny bit of improvement on a horse that you didn't have, the last couple of weeks, or maybe didn't even have at the beginning of that ride that day. So I do it because I have fun with it. And I think that makes me successful because I can also, I can pick out the points, and I'm not always, 100% positive. I get frustrated just as much as the next person about, how a round could have gone. But if you can at least find something that's fun and positive in each round, then that'll build on the next part. And I think another part of it is as much as I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I like to take this very seriously, we're not rocket scientists here. We're just trying to really do things that are fun and enjoy the horse and enjoy what we can do with this. And so if you lose that, then you're not going to be successful. So I think I always try to make sure that whatever we do, I can laugh at myself, and I can, take what happened one day and try to bring it to the next. And that really leads to that kind of, successful forward motion.
Mm-hmm. And, this is a hard sport, especially, people who are competing at the top levels. And so as far as things that or something that you would say is the hardest part of the sport, like whether it be emotionally or physically or financially, what would you say the hardest part is?
I think as a professional, the hardest thing for me is the fact that this is also a business. And while I would like to say it's all fun and games, it's still a way, we're still making a living, and we're still, this is such a high end business with the economics and the finances in this. And people are spending lots of money just to keep up with the Joneses. That part to me can sometimes get in the way of how, what really becomes important. I wish that this was a lot of an even playing field. I wish that we were all just sort of putting in our best effort to make these horses better. But the reality is, it's an expensive sport. And so not just for the trainers and the, people who are kind of working for the living, but the amateurs and the juniors that are spending this money doing this, there's the underlying business part of it where you have such money being put into this kind of, competition. It plays a part of it. It can't not. It would be impossible for it not to. People want to feel like they're getting their money's worth, whether it's the horse they bought or the training they get or the horse show they're going to. And it doesn't always lead to, the best dynamics when things aren't going well. When things are going well, it doesn't matter how much it costs. Everybody's happy about it. Yeah, but when we all, there's things come up all the time. Horses don't work out. Horses, they're animals. They can't talk to us very well in English. We all have situations that we need to tackle and figure out how to make better. And the money side of it can get a little bit challenging when we're trying to, talk about this in a very fair way.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with all of that. And looking back over your career, is there any advice that you would give your younger self?
That's a good question. I think I would give my younger self the advice to be patient with myself. I was always somebody who wanted to be, older and better. And, when I was a young professional, I wanted to be doing when I was a young junior, I wanted to be doing the equitation, like the big kids were doing. And when I was doing the equitation, I wanted to be a professional. And as a professional, I was always, trying to, you got to put in your dues and you got to, take your time And I was always very eager to learn, but I was always in a bit of a rush to get further ahead than where I was. And when I now look back and think, don't worry, you're going to, if you keep going, you'll figure it out. It's almost impossible not to figure it out with the longevity in this kind of business. And not just me, that's anybody who wants to, keep at it and keep working and keep learning. And so, yeah, I would say just be a little more, take the time and enjoy what's happening at the time. Again, that's kind of what I learned with my sister is I was able to look back on it and help her. Well, I think help her. I'm not sure if it actually worked out, but help her enjoy what was happening, as she was going. And actually, the fun thing is now she comes back and she'll ride. She has a regular job doing something, important that I can barely describe, but she comes back to riding, and it's once in a while, and we'll school some horses at our barn or, come and have a lesson with me. And it's kind of like, it's fun again for her, and it's fun again for me to do that, because when we were younger, even as a young professional, I was in a rush for her to keep going. And then I realized that that's, if you slow down that process, you actually get more out of it while you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. And last question here, just what's next for you? What's on your calendar?
Well, we're just starting at WEF. We have a couple of shows December right now that we're using as warm-up shows. And then certainly starting in January, the next 3 months will be pretty intense, and a lot of riding, a lot of catch riding, we have a couple of young horses to sell. So I'm really focused on what's coming up for this Florida season. And then after that, I'll take the next step.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hopping on with me again. It was wonderful getting to know you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, this was great.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode with Kristy Hererra, and a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's episode, Practical Horseman On Demand. Learn more at practicalhorsemanondemand.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. Also, tune into our mini-sode series, The FOD Pod, where you'll hear audio lessons from our favorite Practical Horseman On Demand clips. When you tune into the FOD Pod, listen closely for a promo code for 15% off your Practical Horseman On Demand subscription. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode. I'm Julia Murphy, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman podcast.